All right, guys, so this really starts getting into the absolute heat of what security is about. We're going to start looking at encryption. This is stuff that you may have not seen in other classes, but this is really kind of the meat of security and network security. So one of the first things we're going to talk about are just some basic cryptography concepts. We will start with the different types of encryption, symmetric and asymmetric, public, private key, that stuff. We'll talk about some of the terminology, what a cipher is, ciphertext, clear text, all of those things. These are terms you will most likely see on your Security Plus exam, because this is the stuff that really starts kind of setting this aside from the Network Plus and the other ones. We're going to talk about the encryption algorithms. There are a lot of them. We won't by any means discuss all of them that exist. And there are pros and cons to all of them. You'll see that as we go through these. A lot of the issue with encryption is the speed of a computer. Encryption really boils down to math. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of math, which I can't do, but Dr. Hansen can explain it if you really want to have a lesson on it, is most encryption algorithms work on very large prime numbers. And when I say large, I mean something that I wouldn't even begin to know how to figure out on paper. Like take a SHA-512. That's a 512 character prime number. That's something we can't do, or humans. I'm not going to say can't. I'm sure there's a way to do it on paper, but I don't know it. But computers are good at math. The way that encryption really works is by using this math to scramble the data, and then unscrambling it without having the key makes it difficult. But as computers get faster, the capability of brute force hacking gets faster. That means that, the faster a machine goes, the easier it is to keep trying all the possible combinations to break that encryption. Early encryptions that they used, you'll see when we had slow computers, talking about machines that weren't more than like 20 or 30 megahertz. Okay, great, no problem. It would take a single computer forever to break that. Now, though, what was fast then is not fast, isn't anywhere near what we have fast now. As we keep progressing with our technology, we have to come up with harder and harder encryption so that it's harder and harder to break. And we're going to talk about hashing and what a hash is. Have any of y'all ever run a hash on a file before? Are any of y'all in forensics right now? We'll talk about it in here, but when you get into forensics, 90% of what you do is hashing files. Hash is just a way to verify the integrity of a file. And I don't want to get ahead on the slides because I'm sure we're going to talk about the hashing algorithms. All right, so some basic cryptography concepts. Cryptography is just the practice of studying and hiding the meaning of a message. This is different from steganography. Steganography is hiding the existence of the message. What we're worried about in cryptography is hiding the message. I don't care if you get the file, if it's encrypted and you don't know the key, you shouldn't be able to get the data out of that file. I'm not trying to hide the existence of it. I'm just trying to hide the data that's in it. Encryption is the process of changing that data into something that's unreadable. You will see as we go into these, there are tons of different ways this is done. Some do it on blocks of data, like 64-bit blocks they'll move around and encrypt. Some encrypt every single key. A very simple one, and you can do a little bit of Google research on this, is called a Caesar cipher. That is where all you do is just change the characters by 1 or 2 letters, like an A becomes a C. For example, if your key is 2, an A becomes a C, a C becomes an E. All right, very simple, but that's all this really is. We're just doing it in more complex forms. And the key is the essential piece of information that determines the output of a cipher. In private key encryption, it is a key that's known only to the users who keep that key a secret. You'll see when we start talking about public key, this is a way to try to deal with one of the problems with private key encryption. In the old days, some of you in the military, I'm sure, have heard of this, SneakerNet. When they first started actually encrypting things on military networks, the only way to ensure that a private key remains private is to never send it over a clear channel. They literally would have people go to the different bases with the key that was kept on a floppy disk, and they would go to the servers and load that key onto the system so that it was never transmitted over the network. That was the only way they could ensure that a private key remained private. But when we get into public key, with public key, you can unencrypt something that I send to you using your private key and my public key. So I make a database of all these public keys out there, and it's also a way to ensure that it came from me, because only my private key can encrypt it and only my public key should be able to decrypt it. All right, so symmetric and asymmetric is where we get into this. Symmetric uses a single key. Simple example. Have any of you ever put a password on a zip file or a password in a Word document or in Excel, any of those? That is simple symmetric encryption. You got a password. If I know that password, I can open that file. If I don't know that password, I shouldn't be able to open that file. The problem with that, again, is it requires a secure initial exchange of that key. I have to have a way to tell you, and I really don't need to send that over the network. If I email you a file and say, here's the zip file of, that document, the password is password. All right, I've really just broke my encryption because I've sent you the password in a clear, unsecure communication. If, however, I tell y'all all in class, hey, the password to the file I'm going to send you tonight is 101C. All right, bad example because everybody knows that, but let's pretend they didn't. Then I never send that to you in an email, but I send you the file. I have at least attempted to securely exchange that key with you because it's not sent over a network. Some of the examples of symmetric encryption, DES, triple DES, RC, and then AES. We'll get into a little bit about all of those. There are basically two ways this works. With a symmetric, you have stream ciphers and block ciphers. A stream encrypts every single character, one character at a time. A block, for speed, uses groups of bits, like usually, like DES is 64-bit. It'll do a 64-bit chunk of your file or of your Word document or whatever it is. And then, you'll see why we have some of these that get more secure. DES is actually a little insecure. We added triple DES to make it harder. Triple DES uses that DES algorithm and encrypts the block, and then encrypts that block again, and then encrypts that block again. So in order to break that, you've got to break 3 back. Asymmetric uses different keys to encrypt and decrypt the data. These keys are mathematically related. That's how it works. I'm not going to begin to tell you that I can explain the math behind all of this because I can't. But it's the math between the public and the private key that makes it work. Some examples of this one. RSA is a good one. Diffie-Hellman, the Diffie-Hellman algorithm is one that's been around for a while. ECC is another one. So sometimes we will use public key cryptography. This uses asymmetric keys alone or in addition to a symmetric key. It doesn't require the secure exchange of the secret key. The public key is known. Anyone can use it to encrypt the message. Only the owner, though, of the paired private key can decrypt the message. An example of this is PGP, pretty good privacy for email. In fact, I don't know that we'll get to it today, but I'll show you all a little add-in for Gmail that it's called CryptUp. And it's a very simple PGP add-in. And basically you put your, you use PGP, you create a private key for yourself, then you put your public key in their database, and anybody that's using CryptUp can then send you an encrypted message. And if we were to plug in over here on the network and Wireshark that traffic, we couldn't read any of it. All we would see is a bunch of characters. Without that key, we can't decrypt that message. In fact, that message is stored at Google. Google can't even read it because they don't have the private key. Assuming you kept your private key private, that message would stay that way. These can be used to sign messages. Y'all remember when we started talking about the CIA triad? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is the I portion of that. This is the integrity. Because a private key signing a message not only means that the message should be secure, but assuming my private key hadn't been compromised, you can prove that it came from me. So now not only do we have a way that an email is sent secure, but we can prove that the email came from the sender that said they sent it. Digital signatures fall into this. Very much the same. They authenticate a document with math, letting the recipient know the document was created and sent by the actual sender. Some examples of this: SSL is a type of public key cryptography. The known, the keys are out there for what is used to encrypt things on web pages. But without the SSL certificates, you won't be able to do that, so you can't duplicate that. So now, this is a little different from steganography. Steganography is hiding messages through obscurity. This is where I don't want you to know that I'm sending a message. It may or may not include encryption as well, but you try to send it through a covert channel. An example I like to give when I used to do a little talk on just steganography by itself. In the early days of history, the Romans would send messages using a very primitive form of steganography where they would shave the head of a slave, tattoo the message onto the slave's head, and let their hair grow back. And then they would send them to whoever they wanted to take the message to. They would shave their head to read the message. It's crazy, but think about it. You see somebody on the street, you don't know they got a tattoo on their head. So that, unless they're bald, and then they would be a bad choice for this. But so that's a very simple way to do this. Nowadays in computers, this is done a lot with graphics. You can hide a short message in a graphic file or in a movie file. I've read a lot of papers about steganography. You can do a little bit of research if you know what size the file should be, and you can kind of sometimes realize a message might be there. But if it's properly encrypted, you may not be able to read it. There are a lot of these terrorist websites now that our government has crawled through and private people have crawled through, and they're pretty sure there's steganographic messages in the pictures on the banners on those pages. But without the appropriate key, there's no way for us to figure out what's being sent. One of the only indications that a graphic file or a movie file or anything like that has a steganographic message is the size of the file. Even not knowing a lot about graphics, which I don't, if a 640 by 480 JPEG is 25 megs, it's a pretty clear indication there might be something there that shouldn't be there. But if it's a 25K file and I add a sentence, you may not notice that. So the goal here is to make people suspect the message doesn't exist. This might be used by network security administrators or by hackers. And their example, using a picture to hide that message. All right, so some of the symmetric algorithms. DES is one of the old ones. DES has been around since the 70s. It's an older block cipher that was used by the U.S. government as its encryption standard. When computers weren't as fast as they are, the math with DES worked. DES now uses a weak key. And without getting into the math, that means that you can brute force it easier. Remember, brute force, like a brute force in a password, we're just going to try everything possible till we get something that works. DES is now considered depreciated because it is easily crackable. Triple DES was the answer to that in the quick term. We know there's a problem because people can break this, so we're going to apply the algorithm 3 times. One of the problems with triple DES was that it took 3 times as long to encrypt the data. Not only does if you think about it with encryption, if you're going to use it on a regular basis, not only does it need to be secure, but it's got to be pretty fast. You don't want to spend time with your computer just, encrypting a file. You need to be able to use it. So triple DES was a stopgap in the meantime, and it worked pretty well. It made it a little harder. But again, computers are faster now, so triple DES is also depreciated. AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard, this is what we kind of are using now. There are 3 different block ciphers to it. the 128, the 192, the 256. And I'm going to add that I don't know a lot about it, but I've read about AES512 that's coming around. This is what's called a substitution permutation network block. The way that this works with encryption is by encrypting blocks of data into something else and then rearranging the blocks in the file. So what you get with that is a file that is not only encrypted, but it's scrambled. So that should make it much harder for you to figure out. RC, the Rivas cipher, RC4. This was, used in SSL and some things like that. WEP, we've talked about WEP hacks in here before. These used RC4. Again, we thought it was good, but then somebody figured out that there is a problem with the algorithm, and it is considered hackable. Without getting into it, but y'all can YouTube crack WEP network. You'll notice that there are tools in Kali that you can do that with, and it only really takes, even with a good password, 5-6 minutes to crack a WEP network. RC6 was kind of an answer to trying to do that. It's a security alternative to AES. One of the reasons that I personally think it didn't get adopted so much is you notice the word in there, it is a patented algorithm. The folks that came up with this wanted you to pay to use it. Most of these other algorithms are open sourced. Anybody can write code that will encrypt something, or open source software that can encrypt and decrypt. RC6, they want you to pay to use it. It's kind of like the old IPX, SPX Novell protocol. Do y'all even know what a Novell network is? Any of y'all even heard of that? Way back in the early days of Microsoft, there used to be another server on the market called Novell. And they were actually more popular than Microsoft servers, and they were actually faster. And the algorithm that they use, or the protocol they use, IPX, SPX, is routable, and it's actually faster than TCP/IP. It's a little bit more speedy. But in order to use it, you had to pay Novell a licensing fee to use IPX, SPX. This is why the Internet's TCP/IP now. TCP/IP was open source, so people chose it because they didn't want to pay Novell. And now Novell is almost gone as a company. In fact, unless you're using SUSE Linux, you've probably never heard of them. And look at Microsoft, they're everywhere. All right, so another couple of blowfish and twofish. These are based on what's called the Feistel algorithm. Different ones, again, are good for different things. If you are going to do encryption, like if you're going to do whole drive encryption on your machine, you might want to see which one runs faster on your computer and use that cipher. There are plenty of little programs out there that will test, like 100 megabyte files, just encrypting it with some of these different algorithms to see what turns out faster. Most of the time it's AES, but not always. All right, so other asymmetric keys, RSA. Rivas, Shamir, and Alderman, these are the people that came up with this one. This is a public key algorithm. It is secure if the proper size keys are used. Keys are built off passwords. As long as they're good, secure passwords, this is good. If you use a short key, it's easy to, it's still easy to brute force hack. These work by taking these two prime numbers and multiplying them together. And then it does, it does some math that I'm not even going to try to get into. But one of the problems with RSA is it is vulnerable to a man-in-the-middle attack. Different ones, again, different things. Remember, a man-in-the-middle is where if I can get my hands on the public key and I sit in the middle, I'll pull the data and send it on. Then I've got the data, and if I've got the public key, I can decrypt it. Diffie-Hellman's another one, and notice it also is vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. Most of the public keys face that problem. Because those key servers have to be available. Like if you're going to use PGP out on the internet and send email on the internet using public key and private key, it's really important you keep your private key private because your public key is going to be out there for anybody in the world to download. As it needs to be so that anyone can send you email. Because they don't have to know you, they can use your public key to encrypt it, and then only your private key should be able to decrypt it. All right, ECC is another one. This is based on the structure of an elliptical curve. Again, all of this stuff is math. You got to remember that. All right, something that is sometimes done with encryption is a one-time pad. A one-time pad is a string cipher that basically helps select the random key. It uses a string of bits that is generated at random. We'll get into a problem with that in a minute. It can be computed by hand with pencil and paper. Pretty good privacy we've gotten into already. This is for email. As long as I use good key sizes, it's harder to break. If I use a 2048-bit key, I'm making a really good, really secure key. And most computers are plenty fast enough these days to handle that with no problems. One of the issues here now, talking about the one-time pad, you notice that it says it needs to be random. Well, computers can't actually generate random numbers. They can almost generate random numbers, but they can't truly generate a random number. All right, some of y'all are in coding. You've written a random number generator, or you've run one. Okay, it generates what looks like a random stream of numbers, but they're not truly a random stream of numbers. They are based on something. Right, time or something, you know. So the way that some of these algorithms get around that to make things truly random, they need you to do something to make a random number. If any of you ever play around with VeraCrypt, which is one of my favorites, when you start with VeraCrypt, you are told to move the mouse around the screen. And the longer you move the mouse around the screen, the stronger the algorithm is. The reason for that is the random number is generated by your position of the mouse pointer. They assume that it will be next to impossible for you to undo the 3 minutes of randomly moving the mouse around for you to follow the exact pattern again. One that I thought was really interesting, there is a company that does encryption, and they set up a wall in their headquarters that's got 100 lava lamps in it. And they've got a camera pointed at those lava lamps all the time. And they generate truly random numbers by where the lava is in the lava lamps every second of time. And if somebody walks in front of it, okay, there's somebody there. That's going to change it a little. So this is why random numbers are important to this stuff, and computers can't really do them. If any of you, like I said, you use VeraCrypt, if you really want security, it's worth moving that mouse around for a minute because you're generating a true random number that a computer can't do. Okay, so another important piece of things that goes with encryption but really isn't the same thing as a hash. A hash is just basically a numeric or normally a hexadecimal format of a file. The idea behind a hash is that I can hash a file. I can send you that file. You can hash the file. If the hashes match, you can prove you got the file as I sent it. This is how we try to stop a man-in-the-middle attack from editing the data. Can't really do anything to make sure they don't see the data, but this is a way to make sure they didn't edit the data. If I send you a Word document and I hash it, and then you open it and even change a period and hit save, when you hash it, you're going to get a completely different hash than what I had. Windows uses this to store passwords. This is why if you ever call an admin and say, hey, what's my password? They honestly don't know. They can't tell you your password. They have the ability to change it. Hey, I'll reset it. Your password's now password. Go log in and change it. But I can't tell you what it is. The other part of a hash is that it should never be possible to get the original data back from the hash. So that is the key there to the hash function. It is used a lot in forensics to prove that data is a true copy. If I go into a crime scene, for example, in forensics analysis, and you've got a hard drive there, I hash the hard drive, I get a number. Then I make an image of that hard drive and I hash the image, the numbers should match. If the numbers match, it's admissible in court that I have a true copy of that hard drive. So that's where a lot of this comes in. The hash function is just what's actually going to do it. All right, so some of the types. MD5. MD5 is a very common hash algorithm. There are other ones, SHA-1, SHA-2, SHA-256, 512. Any of you have ever downloaded a file off the internet? You know, a lot of websites will put the hash next to the file. That way you can ensure if you download any kind of hashing program and run it, you can ensure that the file you received was the same. The other thing about these hashing algorithms is they're standard. It doesn't matter what software you use. If I run a hashing program on my Mac and it uses MD5, and you ran one on the PC in here, there's one on all of these, and it uses MD5, we should get the same hash as long as we use the same protocol. It shouldn't matter what software we use. So another one, HMAC and RIPE-MD. All right, SHA, again, is one of the big ones. This is used by the NSA. It's very widely used in the government. SHA-1 is really considered no longer secure. Something that can occasionally occur, and they mention it here, I'm going to explain it, a collision. Remember that everything is based on math is really based on probability. Okay. It is an extremely, extremely, extremely low probability that a collision will occur, but it still exists. A collision is where you have file X and you run a hashing algorithm on it and get this output. Then you have file Y and you run it on that and you get the same output. SHA-1 had a little bit more susceptibility to that because of the algorithm. With these larger ones like SHA-2 and 256 and 512, it's almost improbable. It still has to be mentioned that it exists, but there's honestly more probability of a piano falling out of an airplane right now and hitting one of you than this happening. So, again, it's something that is possible, but it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. And if an airplane falls out of the sky and through here, we're going to make a lot of money. Just putting that out there. One of y'all might have to take one for the team, but that's all right. No, nobody's volunteering for this. Right, right. It's very improbable. I read somewhere that if you do a 1024, which is the the super algorithm, there's a higher probability of you accidentally being able to walk through a closed door. Which, for those of you that dig into physics, that is possible. It is almost infinitely unlikely, but it is possible that your atoms will let you walk through a door. Strange, crazy things. So, all right, some of the hashing with passwords. This is where a lot of this was originally done. We hash a password, we store the hash. That way, if someone gets the file, okay, and for a moment, we're going to pretend rainbow tables don't exist. If someone gets the file, they don't know my password. All they have is the hash of the password. Now, they could start guessing by typing a password and seeing if the hash matches. So originally, Windows used LANman. Your old Windows NT servers used the LAN manager. It stored the password as a hash. It was based on DES, so now it is depreciated. You should not use LANman unless you absolutely have to, and then it better be a closed network because it is not a secure protocol. We moved to NTLM. Notice Windows, they like NT. NT is what they called everything up into Windows Server. It used to be NT Server for new technology. NTLM is exactly what it looks like, New Technology LANman. This was based on RC4. It also, at this point, has been compromised. So we've moved to NTLM2. This uses MD5. This is difficult to crack. Newer versions of Windows used this up until Windows 2012. Now, if your network will support 2012 or above, you use Kerberos, which is a different one. We'll get into the way Kerberos works a little bit later. So this is also why when you upgrade your network, you should try to upgrade all the servers on your network. When they come out with a new version of Windows Server, usually they're making changes to Active Directory, and the Active Directory database is called the schema. Well, to make changes to that, they have to modify it. For compatibility, all the downward compatibility exists in all the new versions of server. You can't normally update Active Directory until all of the old servers are gone on the network. Like, I don't know the status of our network, but if there's a single 2008 server anywhere on our campus or any of the campuses, they can't upgrade the schema till that server is gone, because they've got to be using the 2008 server to be compatible with everything. All right, so a couple of technologies. Pass the hash attack. When an attacker knows the hash of one or more user accounts, and they reapply that to a server on another system, they try to make that other server act like it's the real server you're connecting to. If, for example, I can get your hash file, your password file from Windows, I can set up a fake server. I can do a DNS redirect or an ARP poisoning or whatever I can to get you to go to my new server. If I put that on there, I can get you to log into it, and then I'll have some access to you because you think I'm authentic. Normally what I'll do is add that with a man in the middle. I got you to connect to me, and I'm going to send you onto the real server, but now I'm going to start funneling your data off in the middle. A birthday attack is an attack that attempts to send two messages using the same hash, causing a collision. It, again, is not very probable, but if you do this enough, you might get lucky. Key stretching, I'm not going to really get into the math in it, but one other way is a stretch and a salt. Salt especially, in order to make these keys even a little more secure, we make them all the same length. If you use a short password, which you shouldn't do, but let's say you did it anyways, your key, your hash would be smaller. Well, one way I can increase the security of that, if you accidentally get my password database, is to salt it. And when I salt it, I'm adding random digits to it to make it longer so that it looks the same as all the others. The complexity and length of the password. Keys that are password hashed are only as useful as the length and strength of the password. This is why it really is important that you use a letter and a number and an uppercase. And you can make your password a lot more secure with a symbol. So limit the number of times a password can be typed. This is where it comes to really user finesse, and you have to learn your users. You don't want somebody to just get access to a keyboard and sit there and try passwords over and over. Yet, if somebody's got sticky fingers, you don't want to lock them out and then have to call you after 3 passwords attempts because you don't want to make extra work on you. So finding the mix there is really based off what the data is. Do we have a lockout policy here or not? I don't know if we do. I don't think we do. I don't think we do for students because students type the passwords along. Faculty might have. Do y'all have to unlock it, or is it on a time? Some do time, by the way, and the reason for that is that keeps you from being able to brute force it. If you can only do 3 times and then you're locked out for 30 minutes, that gives you, that's enough time that you couldn't try very many in a day. All right, so in this chapter, there's 10 true, false, and 10 multiple choice. Now that the labs are working, go back and be sure you do the labs for this because you're going to look at some of the different types of encryption. This is an area where I'm not sure what's going to be on your exam. I can tell you when I took Security Plus, which has been a while now, it's been several versions back, I had questions where I had to identify what type of algorithm it was. They would tell me like it's a 64-bit blockchain and it was created by whatever his name is in the 70s. And I had to pick out which type of encryption that was. I don't know if y'all are going to see that or not. So pay attention to what the questions look like, and make sure that you understand the different things. Be absolutely certain you understand the difference in public and private key and symmetric and asymmetric. and know a good bit about how PGP works. Email encryption is something a lot of places do. So take some time to kind of review that.